It finally happened, folks. The moment Britain thought would never come. Parliament didn't just lose control today, it exploded. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, wasn't just shouted down. He was dragged out live on camera as the House of Commons descended into chaos. The gavel couldn't stop it. The Speaker's voice drowned in the storm, and millions of stunned Britons watched their leader's downfall unfold like a scene from a political thriller. What could possibly push the nation's most powerful man to this breaking point? Stay close, because what erupted inside Parliament wasn't just a debate. It was a betrayal that sent shockwaves across the entire country. It began like any other Thursday, a routine parliamentary session, calm, predictable, uneventful. But today, the silence carried weight. The tension in the air was thick, almost visible, as if everyone inside Westminster knew something was about to break. The Speaker took his seat, cameras rolled, and then Nigel Farage stood up. From that single moment, the entire atmosphere shifted. The Labour front bench froze. Journalists stopped typing. Even Starmer, known for his controlled demeanour, looked uneasy. Farage's expression, calm, almost rehearsed. He cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Speaker, the people of Britain were promised honesty, and yet what they received was deceit." The chamber stirred. Whispers, murmurs, nervous laughter. Farage continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. "This government has been secretly negotiating with EU officials, planning to rejoin migration programmes. It swore to reject, and we have proof." Gasps echoed through the room. MPs turned to each other, stunned. Starmer's face stiffened, his hands clenching the notes before him. The Speaker called for order, but there was none. Farage raised a folder high in the air, stamped with official headers, and declared, "The British people deserve the truth, and this Prime Minister has betrayed it." The uproar was instant. Some MPs yelled, "Lies." Others pounded their desks. But amidst the noise, one thing was certain. The damage was done. Starmer stood red-faced, his composure slipping. "This is nonsense," he snapped, but his voice cracked under pressure. Farage smiled faintly, the smile of a man who knew he'd struck the nerve. "Then deny it," he said coolly. "Deny that your government held secret talks with Brussels." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Cameras zoomed in. Millions watched from home, waiting for the Prime Minister's reply. But what came next wasn't an answer. It was an eruption. Starmer slammed his notes onto the dispatch box. "You are a liar, Farage," he shouted. "A man who has poisoned this country with division has no right to question my integrity." The chamber gasped. The Speaker rose immediately. "Order!" The Prime Minister will restrain himself. But Starmer ignored him. He pointed across the benches, voice trembling with fury. "You disgust me, and you disgust this country." His words cut through the noise like a blade, but they didn't command respect. They exposed rage. The opposition benches erupted into shouting, heckling chaos. The Speaker's gavel slammed again and again. "Prime Minister, resume your seat," Hoyle demanded, his voice cold now, his patience gone. But Starmer didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward, eyes blazing, and shouted over the noise, "This man is not fit to be in Parliament." The words that followed changed everything. Hoyle's tone dropped like ice. "Standing Order 43. For those who didn't understand, it meant only one thing: expulsion. Gasps filled the hall. No one expected the Speaker to invoke it, but not for a sitting Prime Minister. "The Prime Minister will withdraw from the chamber immediately," Hoyle ordered. Starmer froze, disbelief etched on his face. "You cannot be serious," he muttered. But Hoyle didn't flinch. "Security," he said firmly. "Escort the Prime Minister from the chamber." The silence that followed was almost surreal. 2 guards stepped forward. Starmer stared, his authority crumbling before the nation's eyes. Cameras captured every second. The disbelief, the humiliation, the slow, reluctant steps toward the door. The Speaker's gavel echoed one last time, and then, as Starmer disappeared beyond the chamber doors, Parliament erupted again, half in outrage, half in celebration. Outside Westminster, crowds had already gathered. News spread faster than fire. Prime Minister expelled under Standing Order 43. On social media, the clips began flooding in, Starmer shouting, the Speaker's command, the guards escorting him out. The hashtags ignited. Hashtag Starmer meltdown. Hashtag PM removed. Hashtag Westminster chaos. And as Britain watched the footage replay on loop, one question echoed across the nation. Was this just a meltdown, or the moment the entire government began to fall apart, the chaos inside? Parliament spilled into the streets like a political wildfire. Within minutes of Starmer's forced exit, the heart of Westminster became a scene of roaring anger and disbelief. Thousands of furious citizens surrounded Downing Street, waving British flags and shouting a single deafening word, "Resign!" The chants echoed through the narrow streets, bouncing off stone walls and iron gates. What began as a few hundred protesters quickly swelled into a mass of fury, a living wave of betrayal and frustration. Cameras rolled, drones hovered, and the world watched as the people of Britain demanded the downfall of their own Prime Minister. News anchors stumbled for words. Sky News replayed the moment on loop. Starmer's red face, the Speaker's icy command, and the sight of security escorting the nation's leader out of the chamber. BBC commentators whispered the phrase "constitutional crisis" with unease. The Guardian called it the day Westminster broke. For the first time in modern history, the British public wasn't just divided. They were united in outrage. Even lifelong Labour supporters stood shoulder to shoulder with Reform and Conservative voters, shouting the same chant, "He lied to us!" As night fell, the mood grew darker. Protesters lit flares, their red glow painting Downing Street in a haze of rebellion. Placards waved high. "No more lies, you betrayed Britain. Starmer must go." Police formed barriers, but the crowd refused to move back. The air was thick with anger and disbelief. Everyone wanted answers, but there were none coming from Number 10. Inside, panic ruled the corridors. Senior aides argued over how to handle the disaster. Some begged Starmer to issue a public apology, to show humility and regain control. But he refused. Those close to him described a man consumed by pride, pacing in silence, muttering that he had been provoked. He blamed Farage, the media, the opposition, anyone but himself. Yet the more he stayed silent, the more the anger outside grew. His leadership, once built on calm authority, now looked fragile, desperate and defensive. Social media burned with fury. Millions watched clips of the parliamentary showdown, dissecting every second, every word. Memes and hashtags turned Starmer's outburst into a spectacle. The meltdown of the millennium, some called it. One video showed his face frozen mid-shout with the caption, "The man who couldn't control Parliament or himself." Every share, every retweet chipped away at what little dignity he had left. By morning, newspapers across the spectrum delivered the final blow. The Telegraph screamed, "Starmer shamed?" The Independent ran with "Prime Minister loses control." Even the Mirror, once firmly loyal, couldn't defend him. The headlines were unanimous that his authority had collapsed. Commentators described him as a leader unravelling before the nation. Polling data began to pour in and the numbers were catastrophic. Public approval had plunged overnight. Trust in Labour hit historic lows. Inside the party, MPs whispered the unthinkable. Was it time for him to go? But the real shock came from within his own ranks. Leaked messages revealed cabinet members expressing doubt, fear, even disgust. One minister reportedly texted, "He's finished. We can't defend this anymore." Another replied simply, "He's lost the room and the country." The sense of betrayal spread faster than the scandal itself. For years, Starmer had built his image on discipline and control. Now, both were shattered beyond repair. And then came the twist. Farage reappeared, calm, confident, smiling faintly as he stepped before the cameras outside Parliament. "This is not about anger," he said smoothly. "It's about accountability." Those 6 words hit harder than any insult. He positioned himself as the voice of reason while Starmer hid in silence. The contrast was devastating. The calm challenger versus the broken Prime Minister. Within hours, donations to Reform UK surged. Their website crashed from traffic. Farage's press conference went viral, hitting 50 million views in a single day. Analysts on every channel repeated the same line. Farage looks like a leader. Starmer looks like a man who's lost everything. And yet inside Number 10, Starmer clung to denial. He refused to resign. He told aides, "This will blow over." But outside his window, the chants grew louder, the anger sharper. Police lines trembled under pressure as the crowd surged closer to the gates. Britain hadn't just lost faith in its Prime Minister, it had turned against him. As dawn broke on another day of crisis, one question hung heavy in the London air. If this was just the beginning, how much worse could it get for a man already stripped of his authority before the eyes of the world? Inside the walls of power, panic had evolved into open rebellion. The Labour Party, once united under Starmer's banner of steady leadership, now resembled a sinking ship, with everyone scrambling to save themselves. Ministers who once stood loyally beside him began to vanish from public view, refusing interviews, skipping meetings, avoiding cameras. Every phone inside number 10 buzzed with the same dreadful question: how much longer can he survive? By midday, multiple resignations hit the headlines. Junior ministers quit first, citing loss of confidence in the government's direction. Then came the senior aides, those closest to the Prime Minister, quietly submitting their letters and disappearing into the night. Each departure added to the sense that the government was collapsing from the inside out. The whispers turned into open plotting. Names were being floated: Wes Streeting, Lisa Nandy, Yvette Cooper, potential successors waiting for the inevitable. Leaked reports from inside Labour HQ painted a picture of chaos. Emergency meetings dragged on for hours as party strategists begged Starmer to step aside before the situation became unrecoverable. But he refused. Convinced that the storm would pass. "This is temporary," he reportedly said. "The public will see through Farage's lies." But the truth was far uglier. The public had already made up their minds. His silence and stubbornness had turned anger into disgust. Polls showed confidence in Labour plummeting to historic lows, with Reform UK closing in fast. The media smelled blood. Every headline was brutal. Labour in freefall, government imploding, the end of Starmer's leadership. Editorials mocked his once pristine image, calling him the man who lost his temper, his control, and his country. Late-night hosts replayed his meltdown, imitating his outburst to laughter and applause. What was once a political scandal had become a cultural joke. In living rooms, pubs, and office break rooms, people whispered, "Did you see it? Did you see him lose it?" The humiliation was complete. Not just a fall from grace, but a public spectacle of collapse. Meanwhile, inside number 10, the atmosphere was suffocating. Staffers described the building as a ghost house. Curtains drawn, phones unanswered, the Prime Minister pacing his office in silence, snapping at aides who dared to speak. No press, he ordered. No statements. No interviews. His refusal to face the public became its own scandal. The longer he hid, the louder his critics grew. Rumours spread that he hadn't slept in days, that he was working in isolation, cut off from reality, still convinced he could ride out the storm. But outside, the nation had moved on. And not in his favour. Protesters were still gathering, not just in London now, but in Manchester, Birmingham and Glasgow. Every city seemed to echo the same chant: "Starmer out." Police presence doubled, yet the crowds kept swelling. The anger had shifted from frustration to fury. This was no longer about one outburst. It had become a movement against deceit and elitism, a rebellion against everything Starmer represented. Even within his party, loyalty had turned into survival instinct. MPs who once defended him now spoke cautiously on camera, calling for reflection and renewed trust. Everyone knew what that meant. They were distancing themselves before the fall. In private, Labour councillors called for a leadership vote. One senior MP was overheard saying, "We need to end this before it ends us." The betrayal had come full circle. Starmer, who once promised unity, now stood alone in the ruins of his own making. And then came the ultimate blow, the leaks from within his cabinet. Confidential emails, meeting transcripts, private texts, all spilling into the press. Messages showing ministers blaming him directly for the crisis, accusing him of arrogance, denial and temper. The narrative was clear. Starmer had become the problem, not the solution. And now his own allies were quietly sharpening the knives. As Parliament prepared to reconvene, the whispers turned into countdowns. Journalists outside Westminster spoke in hushed tones about letters of no confidence. Anonymous sources claimed over 40 members of Parliament were ready to submit theirs. The walls of Labour's headquarters might as well have been closing in. The Prime Minister, once untouchable, now faced the prospect of political exile. The irony was almost poetic. A man who had built his career on law, order and composure, now destroyed by his own inability to control himself. The image of him being escorted from Parliament still haunted every screen in Britain. No speech could undo it, no apology could erase it. His silence, once his weapon, had turned into his coffin. And as the clock ticked toward another session in the House of Commons, one chilling truth lingered over Westminster. The man who led the government no longer commanded it. Britain wasn't asking if he would fall anymore, it was asking when.